In this lecture, I'm going to show you how you can build your own components by combining the elements that we have seen, like rectangle, text, and images. Let's go to Qt Creator and see how we can do that. Okay, here we are in Qt Creator. We are going to create our project as usual. It is an application, a Qt Quick one. We call it Custom Component Demo. Store it in our usual location. Choose the Qt version. And we choose this desktop kit. And we have our project here. But before we start, I would like to show you a component that we are going to need. And that one is column. Okay, it is an element that you use to group elements together. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to define two rectangles inside. This is going to have a width of 300, a height of 100, and a color of red. And we are going to put another one inside. And it's going to be blue. Let's run. And we should have two rectangles laid out on top of each other. This is what we have. This is what this element does. It allows you to lay things out from top to bottom. And you can use some properties of the column to control how they are laid out. For example, you can specify the spacing between these elements. Let's use 20 and see what we get. This is what we have. There is another element that you can use to lay these things out from left to right, and that is called row. You might have guessed it. Okay, left to right. I am mentioning these elements here because we are going to use them to make a point that we want to make in custom components. Now that we know this, let's comment this out. We are going to build a button that the user can click on. And that button is going to be based on rectangle. So it's going to be a rectangle. And inside we are going to have a text element. And the text is going to say button for now. The rectangle is going to have a few properties. So it's going to have a red color and it's going to have a border. Let's use grouped properties. The color of the border is going to be blue and the width of the border is going to be, let's say 3. We should use a semicolon here. Sorry for that. The text is going to have an ID. And we want the rectangle to have the width that depends on this text so that it wraps around it. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to say the width of the rectangle equals the button text ID implicit width. And this is its width after it has been assigned a width that matches the text that is inside. I hope this makes sense. And we are going to add a margin to it like this. We are going to do the same thing for the height. Button text ID, implicit height, and add a margin of 20. Let's see how our button looks. Run your application. This is, we should center the text. So that's easy to do. We can say anchors, center in parent. Run again. And the text is in the middle. But we have a problem. The color should be wrapped in quotes like this. That's an easy fix. Okay, we have our border. We should make this button clickable, so we add a mouse area. It is going to fill this rectangle, so we say anchors fill. By the way, I am always using parent here with the anchors fill property, but you can feel free to also specify the ID of this rectangle if you happen to have specified it. I'll leave it to parent because that's what I'm used to, but you can experiment with that. So on clicked, we are going to say console log clicked on and say what we clicked on. We are going to say the text that is in the text element. So we're going to say button text ID text. I want you to see that you cannot directly call a text property if you are not in this element. If you do this and click, you are going to have a problem because text is not defined here. It is also not defined in the parent element, which is rectangle here. Let's run the application and show you what I mean. Okay, if you click, it is going to say text is not defined because it is not defined in this mouse area here. So you should use the button text ID to specify where this text element is coming from. So we should say button and dot like this. And if we run, it is going to work. Clicked on button. Now we have our button, we like it, but we would like to use it multiple times and we don't want to be copying all these things. So what makes sense is to create a separate component, put this rectangle in, and instantiate it whenever we need it. Let me show you what I mean. I am going to go to our resource file here and add new Qt QML file Qtquick2. We are going to call this mbutton because it is our button. And the Qtquick version in these templates is usually very old. So you can refer to the project that we created. You see that the Qtquick version is 2.11. So we can update this here and copy the rectangle we have here and bring it in the button here. Let's take this item out and we have our rectangle. If we come to the main element and say mbutton, okay, you see that it is recognized and we can instantiate it like this. Let's say button. We have a button here and we can click on it. We can actually specify another one. Let's say mbutton again. And see if we can specify the X location. 100, why not? Run again. It is at 100. Everything looks fine. Okay, our button is working as we want, but there's one problem. Sometimes you want to specify the text that is shown in this button because we don't want it to always say button, okay? So how do you do that? The way you do that, we can use a property alias. What do I mean? You can do something like property button text and link this to button text ID text. Okay, and when we specify button text ID now, let's save this first. And if we run the application, you are going to see that it says button 1 and button 2. If you click on this, it says clicked on button 1. If you click on this, it says button 2. We are defining our own component and we are able to expose some properties of this inner component. But sometimes you don't want other people to be able to access all your properties in your components. For example, users can change the width and the height of the rectangle and the color and the border, but we don't want that. The way you do that, you wrap your components into an item component, just like this, and put it inside. And what you have to do is to export your properties the same way you've been doing, and you have to expose your properties at the root level of your parent item. Okay, the parent item is this item here, and we should give it an ID. And this is where we expose our properties. If we run the application, it is going to look like it's working as expected. We click on button, you see button 1. You click on button 2, you see button 2. But the user has no way to specify what happens when this button is clicked. and we need to export this signal. The way you do that, you specify signal like this and say button clicked. And when the user clicks in the mouse area, you want to call your signal here. And this is a signal that the user can specify here. So we are going to comment this out because we don't want it to confuse us. We are going to say root ID because it is at this level that the signal is defined, and say button clicked like this. Okay, now the user can say on button clicked, do something, say console log, and we can do the same thing for the button 2. And we are saying from main file so that there is no confusion about where this signal is coming from, even if we commented this out. I am this paranoid. Run the application, click button 1, clicked on button 1 from main file, we are able to capture this signal that the button has been clicked. And the same thing happens to button 2. We are almost done with this. But when we try to wrap our buttons here in a row component, let's do that, or a column, let's use a column. I'll have to lay my things out from top to bottom. Okay, put this in a column. And because the column is taking care of our positioning, we don't want to specify this X anymore. So let's take this out, run the application. And what we're going to see is going to be very surprising. You see that we only see button 2. Why is that? What is happening here is our column is trying to position these items, but it doesn't know the width and the height of this button of ours. Notice that we didn't expose the width and the height of this rectangle. And it is impossible for the main file to know the width of this rectangle because we didn't expose it. So if we want row and column to position our custom component very well, we should expose the width and height. You should remember this because these errors are very hard to debug, and I've had students come to me many times about this problem. So you should really focus on this. When you define your own components, you should make sure that they have a width and height exposed to external QML files. And the way you expose these properties, you give your rectangle an ID. So you say, for example, and simply expose the width to be container and the height to be, okay, and this takes care of exposing these properties to the outside world. I am going to go to the main file, run again, and you see that it looks like nothing changed. This is because Qt Creator sometimes has a problem. When you change other files that the main file is using, you have to come to the main and make it look like something changed. So we are going to click to add a space here, run again, and you see that our buttons are now positioned very nicely. I like this better. And I hope this really exposes you to ways you can define your own components. You put them in a different file. When you put them in that file, and that file happens to be in the same location as the main file, you don't have to do anything. You just call your components like we did here for mbutton. Another thing you should do is to wrap your components into item to kind of control what properties are visible to the outside world. For example, we wouldn't want people to be able to change the color. Let's see what would happen when we try to set the color property to this mbutton of ours. Let's do that. You should try things out. You see that color is not recognized. If you try to run, it's going to warn you of this problem. It's probably going to say color is not defined, cannot assign to a non-existent property color. Okay, so this is not exposed. You can see that you can make your properties of your elements private by wrapping your component into an item. And this is really important to do. Another thing you saw is how you can expose signals. You can expose your signal by declaring your signal like this and then calling it when something happens, like we did here. And last but not least, you should always specify width and height for your custom components. Otherwise, you're going to have problems laying them out in positioners like row and column. This covers all we set out to do in this lecture. In the next chapter, we're going to start look at user input elements in Qt Quick. I'll see you in the next lecture.